guys. It's our first deep dive into like some tasty topics. This week's going to be all about carbs. I've got some other ones planned for the next few weeks, but today we're going to go deep on carbs. And the reason for that is really they're getting a bad rap recently. They're not that bad. They're really not that bad for you. So my goal today is to prove to you why they're not that bad, and also bust some myths around carbs, because there's a lot of stuff out there and mostly it's just money making. So yeah, we're going to bust some myths and we're going to see why we need carbs in our diets. So yeah, the first thing that I want to talk about really is how vital carbs are for us. I mean, this is just a little fact. This is a good fact to know. Your brain needs 130 grams, thereabouts, 130 grams of glucose every day just to function. 130 grams. Now, that might come from like literally what you're eating, your intake, or it might be converted from other stores in your body. But either way, that's how vital it is for our bodies. We need to get those carbs in, glucose being a form of carbs. And the other thing, which is going to move me nicely into my next segment, is that carbs are really vital for hormone balance. Now, especially in women, we've got like quite complicated, intricate hormonal systems. We've got a lot going on, and carbs are really, really vital for this. So women in particular are quite sensitive to changes in like your carb intake. So if we were to imagine like having children is actually a luxury. I know most people do it and that, you know, it's quite easy or whatever, but not easy. I'm not putting down childbirth and child rearing and stuff. But what I mean is the body, that takes a lot of resources and it's a lot of stress for the body to have a child. So if there's any circumstance where it thinks, actually, I don't know if we're going to cope with this, it's not going to want to do that. And lowering your carb intake is a form of stress on the body. And it could also be seen as like starvation. And if the body's going through that, it's going to think, well, I haven't got the resources to put into a baby. I've barely got enough to, you know, fuel this one human. I can't fuel two. And even if I did manage to make a baby and it came out in the world, if there's not enough food around, how's it going to survive? So anyway, yeah, having a baby is a luxury for the body. And if it feels like it can't cope, it's going to start to downregulate those hormones so that we can't make them. So things like estrogen, progesterone, things like that, they're going to start decreasing. So whilst that's happening, and because the body's so stressed about, you know, this lack of food, cortisol's then going to rise. And then the bad effect of cortisol, get this, is that it's going to decrease all those reproductive hormones. And then those two things are happening. So cortisol's going up, estrogen, progesterone, those going down. And that balance actually promotes body fat around the middle especially. So whilst your original goal of lowering your carb intake was probably to lose weight, actually what you've done is messed around with the hormone system and balance so much that it's actually promoted the storage of body fat. So it doesn't necessarily work. So the other thing is with that as well, again, this is all hormones and things, but a low carb intake suppresses the immune system. So that's probably why you're not feeling great if you're doing a low carb, and it's that low carb flu. If you've ever done a low carb diet, you'll know the low carb flu. It's not great, and it's because your immune system is being so suppressed. So talking about hormones, the one that comes up a lot with carbs is insulin. What about insulin? That's another one that's gotten a bad rap really. So I'm here to bust the myth on insulin. And I think it's come from diabetes, essentially. Everyone's talking about how bad sugary foods and high carb is developing diabetes, like type 2 mostly in people. And then they have problems with insulin, so then the automatic assumption is, insulin must be bad. I want to keep insulin at a low. Well, no, actually, insulin is actually a satiety hormone. So it's a hormone that promotes the feeling of fullness. So actually we want insulin because without it, we're just going to want to keep eating and keep eating. So we need insulin in the blood. And the other thing about insulin is it's not actually doing anything bad for you. It's not the insulin that promotes the fat storage. So insulin's just like, I like to think of it as like a, you know those people you see on the streets, the traffic wardens, they're like directing people where to go. Insulin's kind of like that. It has a look at how much sugar is in the blood, like how much traffic's on the road, and it just tells it where to go. We need to keep a certain amount of sugar in the blood all the time, ready to go. And then the rest of it, some of it's going to go to the liver, some of it's going to go to muscles, some of it's going to get stored elsewhere. Some of it might end up going to fat if we haven't eaten enough, but that's not the insulin's fault. It's got to put it somewhere. So yeah, the insulin's just a little traffic warden, and it's not a bad thing in and of itself. So actually, as well, insulin is a muscle building hormone as well. So like I said, it's telling the stuff where to go. So if it's promoting things to go into your muscles, it's promoting muscle building. Now that muscle mass is actually vital, and especially for women. So muscle's an active tissue, meaning that even if it's not doing anything, if it's just at rest, it's costing calories to keep it alive. Whereas fat isn't. Fat just is just there. It just survives. Muscle actually is expensive. It costs a lot to keep it alive. So we want muscle. We want to keep it. We want as much of that lean tissue as possible. And insulin is really good for that. So yay for insulin. On the contrary, low carb diets actually promote muscle breakdown. So they're actually, because we're not getting enough fuel, and like I said earlier, the brain needs a certain amount of fuel and other processes in the body. It's got to get the sources from somewhere. And if you haven't got them, it's going to have to turn to muscle. So low carb, not necessarily great. That's my take on low carb. So the other question that I had, that I was asked to cover in today's deep dive on carbs is there a difference in carbs? Are there good carbs? Are there bad carbs? So we just sort of briefly talked about what happens in the body. Essentially, they're going to end up in the same place, the good carbs and the bad carbs. The end result is going to be the same. They're going to end up as sugar in your bloodstream. They're going to get directed to wherever they need to go. But the process of how they get there is very different. I don't like to label them good and bad carbs, but there are certainly simple and complex carbs. So complex carbs are literally like they sound. They're lots of like chains put together. They're lots of links, and they're really difficult to break up because they're so like interlocked. It's like a stack of Lego maybe. So the body has to put a little bit of extra work into breaking those down into the sugars that you need to put into your bloodstream or into the other parts of the body, wherever it's going to go, which obviously takes a little bit longer. And while the body's busy doing that, it doesn't want any more food, so it makes you feel full. So those complex carbs, they're usually full of fibre, which is good for us, and they also usually make us feel quite full. Now, simple carbs, they haven't got those complex structures where they're all like linked together. It literally just is. And that's really, really easy for the body to break down and to use. So it goes into the bloodstream pretty quickly. Now, that's not to say that they're bad, because in some situations, we absolutely need those carbs to go straight into the bloodstream. If you are about to do a workout or like a really long run, you're going to need some energy. So simple carbs can be really, really useful for us. But if we're not going to use that energy right away with like a workout or something, it tends to increase the blood sugars to a point, and then it crashes once the insulin comes in and sorts it out and sends it off to all its places. And then we just want more. So that's really the problem that we find with simple carbs. Now, we can lower the effect that it has on the bloodstream if we eat them with other foods. So you can eat simple carbs, and if you imagine, so there's like a glycemic index, which is how quickly a food will spike your blood sugar. But you can bring down the glycemic load, which is how much effect it has on your blood sugar as a whole meal. Because how often do we eat carbs just as what? Well, I say that. I did have a slice of bread earlier. But we don't always just eat carbs as just on their own. We eat them with other things. So if you're eating a slice of bread and peanut butter, for instance, then your gut's got to digest the bread and the peanut butter, and the peanut butter takes longer. So it's going to take longer for the sugars from the bread to end up in your bloodstream. I hope that makes sense. But yeah, if you can combine them with other foods, it changes the effect that the food's going to have on you. So We've got complex carbs, we've got simple carbs. They're not good, they're not bad, they're just useful in different ways, and we can change the effect that it has on our bodies. Speaking of these simple carbs, the other thing that's gotten a bad rap recently is fructose. Now, I don't know if anyone's heard about this anywhere. Maybe it's just in like my circles because I like to, read all about food and stuff. But fructose has got a really bad rap lately because it's a fruit sugar. So manufacturers thought, right, I know what we're going to do. People are really, really wary of sugars nowadays in their food. So we're going to put fructose in because they'll go, oh, that's a fruit sugar, so it must be healthy. And then people have cottoned on and gone, actually, no, that's not healthy. Therefore, fructose must be bad. No. So fructose is a fruit sugar. That's usually where we find it, in like strawberries, apples, things like that. It is a simple carb, meaning it's really quick to break down. But the thing with fructose is the liver really likes it. That is its preferred source of energy. So actually, when we eat fruit or when we eat fructose, let's just talk about the fructose for a minute. We'll come back to the fruit as a whole. When we eat fructose, the body digests it, sends it straight to the liver. So it actually isn't having that effect on our blood sugar like other sugars might. It actually isn't as big of a problem as that. And the other thing is, as I was saying earlier, we don't eat things in isolation. So when we're eating fruit, we're not eating just fructose. We're eating fruit with fibre, with water, with other micronutrients that are in the fruit, and those things are really good for us. So should we be shaming fruit? I don't think so. Fructose that is added into processed foods, it's not the fructose that's the problem. It's the lack of fibre, it's the lack of nutrients in those. So it's not the additions really that are the problem. It's the processes and it's the lack of good stuff that we've got from eating whole foods. Which brings me on to bread. A hot topic, bread. Again, I just want to preface this by saying bread isn't bad. I literally ate some bread earlier and it was white bread, wasn't even brown. So, like I said, food isn't good and food isn't bad. Food has different effects on the body and we just need to be aware of them, and then we can make informed choices. So there are better breads and there are worse for us breads. Doesn't mean you have to deprive yourself though. So brown or wholemeal bread tends to be better for us because of those things that I mentioned earlier. It's got more micronutrients, it's got more fibre in it. So it's going to help to keep you full for longer, it's going to have a better effect on your body, and it's not going to get into your bloodstream as quickly. That doesn't mean that we can't ever eat white bread though, especially if it's loaded with peanut butter. We just want to mix it up. We want to vary it. If your only carb source is bread and white bread, then yeah, probably we've got an issue with your diet and we need to look at including some other things. But it's not because bread is the problem, same as the processed foods. It's not the addition of bread that is the problem. It's the lack of all the other things that we're not getting that is the problem. So we want to make sure that we're getting good whole foods, good carb sources in there, potatoes, rice, veg, things like that in there. But we do not need to cut out bread. If that were the case, I would not become a nutrition coach because I would not be able to tell people to cut out bread. Okay, the other thing that I asked about was carb cycling. So this one's really interesting. There's two ways you can carb cycle really. You can carb cycle like per day. So carb cycling is eating like different amounts of carbs. Sometimes you might eat a really low carb, or sometimes you might eat really high carb, and you can do that like per day. So on one day you might only get 50 grams of carbs, and on the next day you might get 200. Or you can vary it by meal, so like time of day. So in the morning maybe you don't eat many carbs, and then you load most of your carbs around like a workout or something, or you eat most of your carbs in the evening. So that's really the two different ways to cycle carbs. So I got asked whether it was good, essentially. And here's my take on it. Carb cycling is a really advanced nutrition strategy. So it's like top 10%. If you haven't got that bottom 90%, if you are not eating enough protein, you're not getting enough fruit and veg in, you're not drinking enough water, your sleep's terrible, you're not moving, carb cycling is not going to cure all of those issues. you've got bigger things to focus on than worrying about how many carbs you're eating at 5 p.m. You need to get those basics in first. However, there can be some times when carb cycling might be useful. If it's like mentally it's good for you, if you're on a calorie deficit, so you're eating fewer calories than you're burning per day, and eating low carb is fine, like you can do it for like 1 or 2 days, but then after that you're like, God, I need some bread. You could switch it up if that's a really good thing for you mentally, to go, do you know what, I want to really feel like I'm doing something Monday to Tuesday, but Wednesday I just need to chill out a little bit and eat loads of carbs. Great, go for it. Because over the whole week, your intake's going to be more or less the same. And the body doesn't work like minute by minute, day by day. We're looking at long-term things here. So if that works for you mentally, great, go for it. If you want to really optimize your performance in the gym and you want to load your carbs up just before, maybe some simple ones, because we know that they give us energy pretty quickly, so that you get really good performance in the gym, and then you eat a load of carbs afterwards as well, so that you get good recovery and you're repairing those muscles. Great. If that works for you, do that. So that really is the thing with nutrition. Everyone is so unique and so different, and their digestive systems work so differently, and their mental, side of things work so differently. If it works for you, great, do it. What I will say is there isn't any real like concrete research around it being beneficial. It's all anecdotal stuff, and you can find anecdotal stuff to back up pretty much anything you want. So if it works for you, do it. But if you think it's going to be the thing that changes your life and you hate doing it, probably don't do it. Which also brings me on to eating carbs at night. So another question I got asked, and also something I see all the time, also raising my hand because I believed this at one point because it was all over social, so obviously that makes it true. You do not have to stop eating carbs after a certain time. An apple doesn't suddenly triple its calorie value just because it's 7:15 in the evening. The effect on your body is exactly the same whatever time of day you're eating. Now, the only thing I would say is if you're eating those simple carbs, those high sugary carbs, just before you go to sleep, you're probably going to have more of an issue with sleeping. And as we know, sleep is the foundation of life. But it does truly have an impact on our nutrition. So if you're eating like sweets at 10 o'clock and you're falling asleep and you're going into bed at like 10:30, then you're not going to be able to sleep properly because you're too wired, and then you're going to make poor choices the next day because you didn't get good enough sleep. So that's my only take on it. But if you want to eat food at like 8 o'clock at night, be my guest. If it wants to be a slice of white bread at 9 p.m, I'm not going to stop you. On that note though, this isn't about carbs, but as an aside, protein and fat actually is a really good, I know I go on about protein all the time, but it is actually a really good thing to eat just before bedtime. Because they're so slow to digest, it puts your body in this like rest and digest state. So you've got like two states of your body. You're either on, you're doing stuff, you're active, you're going, or you're off. Your body's doing all the internal processes, it's resting, it's digesting. So if it's digesting that protein and fat, it puts you in that mode and you're ready to go to sleep. Again, anecdotal, and it might not work for you, but I like it, and that's my little aside from carbs. So, coming into a summary really, is low carb ever okay? I think really what we've discussed is mostly it's what works for you. So if you find that you are performing well in the gym, you're not groggy and moody, your hormones aren't playing you up, it's not mentally taxing on you, and you like eating low carb, great, go for it. If any of those things apply though, and it's really difficult for you, you don't have to put yourself through that stress. I'd also say that if you have like quite a lot of weight that you're looking to lose, like significant amounts, like £100 plus, you probably could afford to go a little bit lower carb and not suffer from those things as much, just because you've got extra stores, carb stores and fat stores that your body can convert into carbs in your body already. So you're probably not going to suffer from those side effects as bad. And if your lifestyle's not too active, and again, you don't need those carbs for fuel sourcing, you can probably, afford to go a little bit lower, but it really is up to you. The thing that I found works the best for weight loss is high protein. It doesn't matter, I'm not going to veer off into a whole protein thing, don't worry, but it doesn't really matter whether you go low carb, low fat, high fat, whatever. That protein, if it's high enough and it's consistent, you can make a balance of whatever else you want with your remaining calories, as long as you get the protein in. That's like the non-negotiable. The other two, do what you want. The body doesn't really care that much. So whatever's going to work for your digestive preferences and your lifestyle preferences, go for it. That's fine. So just before we wrap up, I've been talking so much about carbs and whether we should go low carb or whether we should eat them, blah, 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 blah. How much should we eat? This is the ultimate question. How much carb should I eat? Generally, I recommend about 1 or 2 handfuls. So literally, like, what can I cup in my hand? And trust me, you can get a little bit more bread than you think in there. How much can I fit in a hand? 1 or 2 of those per meal. If you're quite active, you might want a little bit more than that. If you're not so active, you might need a little bit less. But yeah, about 1 to 2 handfuls per meal. Figure out what works best for you, but that's a really good starting point. And that's not including veg, by the way. So I'm not saying like a handful of veg and that's your carb source. Veg is separate, that's like a 4th macro. But of like oats, rice, potatoes, those sort of things, 1 to 2 handfuls. And that's about it for my deep dive on carbs. I hope that it was easy to understand. It's so easy to get bogged down in so many sciencey things, and I tried to just pick out the really useful stuff to explain it enough but not get you going like, what? But if it wasn't easy to understand, please let me know. Maybe I can do a better job of explaining it again, or next time I'll know not to get too sciencey or more sciencey. Was there anything that I didn't answer that you still need to know about carbs? Let me know, because I'm going to do a Q&A in 3 weeks time anyway, so I could answer some more things there. And if any of that has made you go, I don't know what to do with life anymore, just send me a message and I'm sure we can sort something out. So thanks for watching. That was really nerve-wracking, but also kind of enjoyed it. So next week we're going to be looking at all 3 macros, and not about each one individually, but more like how you should split them, how accurate should you be with that, how can you measure them, that sort of thing. So yeah, we're going to be looking at a diet as a whole next week, and I hope you join me then. See you later. Bye.